was nothing that could have compared to this. The sky, sown with lightning and bathed in the embers of dragon flame, pushed back the dark of night, burning as if by the coming dawn. Chittering screeches and the heavy timbre of wings amplified through the clouds as twisted faces and fangs pushed themselves into the open air. A mighty flame herald, a dragon with wings that cast deep shadow over the plains, roared and beckoned its kin into sight. And on its back was perched a rider with eyes full of fury and malice. Maki had allowed himself hope. His heart fluttered in his breast and stirred him to rally to the good of his kingdom at the sight of the angels perched to the winds along the hills of lavender and grass. When the divisions had followed the processions of otherworldly soldiers, angels, and demons, he felt the weight of the ether sweep the dust from the stones of the street and even give birth to the dead as they bore witness to the spectacle of the channeler's might. But now, sat at the feet of this calamity, tasting the air of the storms of their coming and smelling the blood of the victims of other worlds fresh on the shivers, weapons, and armor, he wept. He wept silently for the future he no longer had faith that they'd see. Shoku saw his lamentations and thought it fair and valid. She rocked herself from the saddle of her mare and spanked at its thigh, her finger and voice directing it to flee from the battlefield. Maki noticed her at his back and steeled himself full of hollow courage. If Shoku had seen his face, that fear would have merely been between friends. What he could not abide was the contagion of unsettling terror to infect the division, reaffirming what they all knew to be true. This war was one of the end. They imagined no marches of joy and triumph through the streets, no cheering children and women weeping for joy, seeing their husbands return with scars and scrapes decorated by badges of valor. This storm, this rancid incursion, it brought the stench of finality. Shoku sat in the grass at Maki's feet, her eyes burned with anticipation and her teeth grit so hard together, the muscles in her neck strained tight and taut. Maki glanced down at her. She was waiting. He saw her hands grip so intently to her knives that she could have twisted the metal in her palms. She was waiting on him. Maki took a deep breath. The odor of burning air and dragon's breath filled his throat. He turned his spear in an arc and raised the banner with a shaky hand. The division's banner danced and twirled in the wind. Maki's voice grew beneath its shadow, rallying the soldiers to yell behind him. He pointed the spear towards the enemy and took his stance, digging into mud and grass. Shoku stood, twirling her knives by the rope attached at their ends. She smiled and walked forward. "We're just ghosts," she whispered to him. He felt his body go limp. He saw his father's face, smiling and rough, all at the same time, just as he had always been. This spear had first known his father's hands. Maki wondered, had he ever faced a fight that made his palms sweat as his did now? His thoughts were interrupted now by the final stages of the Shiver invasion, spewing onto the fields of newly scorched lavender. Twisted soldiers, each with eyes full of fire and malice, crawled to their feet as a large dragon, the beast of great shade, placed its wings firmly to Balawan air, and its rider pointed his blade towards the kingdom. Maki saw a blur to his left. The once waiting hosts of heaven and hell that were gathered in anticipation around that mage, the channeler that the wardens had so firmly touted, compelled themselves forward and threw their vicious bodies into the fight headfirst. A mighty angel with pitch black skin and a spear with the radiance of the first rays of the morning tore through a section of grounded enemies and spread wings colored in copper and rust hues. Soldiers of the channeler's cohort moved close behind. Their pace and fervor seemed inhuman and graced by the most powerful of ethers. A black-armored soldier, with his sword flung from its sheath so immediately to cleave the invaders, seemed possessed and driven as if by madness. Maki's eyes raced over to his friend. Whatever fever had infected that soldier in black was now surely caught into his captain's chest and burned with a compulsion that made her feet take her into battle. Maki roared and urged himself forward. He heard the thunder of feet at his back. His division was now moving with energy borrowed from his shaky courage. Each man and woman pushing the next forward with a magnetism powered by a sense of duty to each other and to the kingdom. Maki charged with the weight of his banner pushing him forward and let loose the pondering of reason, making light his mind and his blade. They quickly approached the sea of wicked soldiers, and their blades and shields and bodies crashed hard into snarling masses. Shobu disappeared from his sight. He never thought to worry or to search the horde for her fleeting shadows, though. He could feel her malice, clear as her hand on his shoulder, and he knew that the screams of the enemy, erupting through the gashed and carved throats, were coaxed by the winds of her artistry. He leapt into the air, raising his spear to the night sky before its blade was slung down through shiver flesh and bone and blood and gore. He flicked it, sending that gore to the wind and moving to dirty his blade yet again with the blood of their invaders. His eyes glossed over in manufactured fury as he pushed through the crowd. This enemy was virulent. Their ranks were filled with nightmares and tortured soldiers. Their bodies were pierced with shards, their limbs bound and twisted into unnatural formations. Maki recoiled in disgust with every strike. He'd never had his heart tinged with the murky cloud of hate before. There might have been moments of extreme discomfort or disappointment, but never with the fires of anguish and disdain lit so firmly in him that he might have been able to call what he felt hate. But now, that fire was lit. Its dance was stoked and now spread through his body, his bones, fueling its heat like a forest floor dried into kindling. His world will never be the same. Many of his friends and the soldiers under his charge would undoubtedly perish. The land itself, the sky and the grasses, the lavender he had so often lay in with his beasts by his side. But now here he was, hacking clumsily through walls of shiver, not clear on what he would find on the other side. But it was here, during this maneuver, through the maze of shiver bodies, that Maki ran full on into a shiver who immediately proved himself different from the rest. He seemed a bit older, a short-haired gentleman with a slender build and eyes that pierced the air in front of him. He waited and held a thin blade in his right hand, low and to his side. He took a single step with his right foot and turned the ends of his mouth into sigils of disapproval. His ether flared, and Maki felt the hairs all over his body stand up. The old shiver propelled himself forward. His blade was slung towards Maki's brow and barely stopped by Shopu's blades. The shiver snatched his weapon back and thrust it into the space where her head was. She threw herself to the ground, narrowly avoiding the strike as she kicked Maki back and out of the fight. "Get out of your head!" Shobu roared. Her blades were slung in sparking arcs and recalled to be used in a more direct style. "We need you here." Maki glanced down at her scarf, now muddied and torn, and then raised his eyes to see his captain again. He huffed, gathering his breath under his armor, which now felt so much more suffocating than usual. He growled and pulled his spear across the air. The heads of a couple shiver abandoned the bodies of their hosts, compelled to the grass by his thrashing. He leapt forward again and threw his blade against the air as if pulling the weight of the world along with it. The spear crashed against the guard of the old shiver. His face, now discontent, turned to surprise. The timid man, now ferocious. Maki called out, "Bediako, come!" Ether swelled and crackled with the gentle smell of plums and heat. A flag, tasseled and grand, danced above the heads of soldier and shiver until its bearer, coal-skinned and jade-eyed, appeared. He chopped at the shiver with a rust-kissed machete and allowed his ether to bless his superiors. Maki felt his muscles surge and took his compatriot's boon with thanks. His spear was thrust out at his opponent, flashing and dancing through the air in a dazzling display of emboldened aggression. Bediako continued his dance in arcana. His flag turned horizontal and frenzied. Its cloth spiraled and was snatched through the sweltering winds before its bearer darted directly to the defense of his vice-cap. They fought together well, but this shiver, with his life-laden step and flowing and crashing sword stroke, held his own. He was unmoved. His expression was fixed and stony. The elder's eyes, lit with gold, followed the assault and repelled it during each exchange. He was bored. A low grumble left his throat and gave voice to his discontent. Enough was enough. It was time to end this fight. He charged his enemy and prepared to tear into their guard when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something was wrong. He quickly removed himself from the engagement. His eyes darted around the battlefield. He'd figured it out. While he was busy being unmoved and unimpressed, his enemy had slipped away. The woman was gone. Maki smiled as he stepped forward with his spear outstretched. "I promise I'll give you my full attention," he began. "Why don't you extend that courtesy to me as well?"